So, welcome everybody to this Museums Association virtual conference. And this session is the fantastically titled From an Era of Change into a Changing Era, and it's Latin America Reimagines Museums. I'm Simon Stevens from the MA, and I'll be facilitating the session. Before I hand over to our chair, Americo Castilla, there's just a few housekeeping announcements to make. Firstly, as attendees, your cameras and microphones should be automatically disabled, but you can use the chat function on your menu to talk to other people and share ideas and experiences. You can also tweet using the hashtag, which is hashtag Museums 2020. There'll be some time for questions, so if there's something you'd like to address to the speakers, please can you ask questions through the Q&A function. You should be able to see this at the bottom of your menu bar. The chair will put selected questions to today's speakers, so please keep your questions short and to the point. You can leave and rejoin the session at any time. We are recording the session today, and this will be available on the MA website next week. We have both audio description and live captioning for every session. So audio description uses the language interpretation feature on Zoom. This allows you to select a language to listen alongside the main session. If you require audio description, please press interpretation on the toolbar at the bottom and select French. Please leave the original audio on, or you'll not be able to hear the conference speakers. Live closed captioning is also available, and that's also at the bottom of your screen. If you require live captioning, please press closed captioning and select show subtitles. So hopefully we won't have any technical problems. If we do, you can message me through the chat function privately and I'll try and help. But now that's all out of the way, I'm going to hand over to Americo Castilla. We're very excited about this session. Americo, it's over to you.
Thank you very much, Simon. And hello to everyone. We are very pleased to be able to discuss our thoughts on how coloniality and modernity influenced and how cultural institutions try to react. And I want to give you some examples of how museums in Latin America show signs of a possibility of substantial change on how they may deal with society. I don't know if you're seeing, I think you're watching Simon's screen, is that right? Simon? Okay, yeah, you see me.
They just watch it, they can just see you, Americo, and Walter and Maria.
Okay. So, my name is Americo Castilla. I direct the TyPA Foundation, and in the museum world, I'm more known as the academic director of Reimagining the Museum, which is a biannual meeting we do of museum professionals from mostly from all the Americas, and it is known by many as some of the most influential and radical convenings among the museum world in terms of trying to put up with social problems that go on in our region mostly. And I'm very privileged to be with the company of two great colleagues. One is Walter Mignolo. He's a writer, a thinker, and he was born in Argentina, and he is now based at Duke University in the US, although traveling the world over with many distinguished honors, such as Doctor Honoris Causa, among other places, at the University of Goldsmith. And Marilia Bonas, she's the director of the Museum of Portuguese Language and also a Museum of Football, a museum I admire, although I am not so passionate about Brazil when they beat Argentina on football. But at this time, we're all friends and colleagues, and we'll share this discussion. I will share now a screen. Wait a minute. Okay. So, I'm trying to do a single image, which I cannot find how to. Wait a minute. Yeah, there. During a recent demonstration in La Paz, in Bolivia, the image of the marble monument you see on the screen was dressed up the way Andean indigenous women do. Sculpted in honor of Isabella I of Castile, Queen of Castilla and Aragon, benefactor of Christopher Columbus, voyage to America, expeller of the Jews and the Islamism from her kingdoms, mother, as you know, of Catherine of Aragon, first wife of King Henry VIII, where this royal description made me waste some essential minutes of my presentation. But it's hard to find a more evident portrait of colonial rule as of late 15th century and its contemporary reaction. Even my own name, Americo Castilla, reflects that tension we will be referring to. We have been watching how people have flocked around some monuments as if asking them to justify why were they built, or finding that some of its meanings serve to build community around them. Levi Strauss wrote an inspiring work on totemism, analyzing how colonial thought ascribed that concept and its practice to primitive, that is, non-European societies, as distinct to Christian civilized rituals. The current reactions to monuments identified with racist domination in Europe and in the US makes me doubt about what characterization of totemism and reflect on who is and who is not primitive, as those totems bring communities together and express affinities or, more often, disgust. In late 20th century, more precisely 1972, an extraordinary political phenomenon took place in Chile. A socialist government emerging from a peaceful democratic election, led by Salvador Allende, was putting into practice, not without opposition, the long preached ideas of social justice. And ICOM decided to hold a regional Latin American meeting within that turmoil and brainstorming of ideas, which Henri de Véran, president of ICOM at the time, judged the meeting as revolutionary. The Santiago Round Table proposed an integrated museum, meaning by that a concept that pretended to hold within the museum issues the current social emergencies, as well as the new pedagogy of the oppressed, as described by Paulo Freire. In my opinion, it was not the question about ideas that made this roundtable memorable, but its format. The museum directors from the region were summoned to listen and discuss with eminent scientists who exposed the current social dilemmas, encouraging their institutions to be agents of transformation. And this is something we want to emulate today, and that's one of the reasons why we invited Walter to talk to us. Some community museums in Mexico or eco-museums in Scandinavia and Canada subscribe their origin as derivative from that Round Table of Santiago of 1972. But museum typology is not the solution for a successful community involvement. I instead think that Santiago, embraced to a group of leading scientists, has inspired us in proposing a radical change within the museum as an organization and its goals towards its context, whatever their size, format, or location. The good news is that some museums from the region have started to show signs of what the new era is demanding from them. And I'll give you a few examples. In Argentina, a museum-workshop built among the railroad workers, families after the whole railroad transportation system throughout the country was dismantled, they kept their tools as jewels. And those treasures are now part of the collection of the museum. The museum is located at a place that was originally a port, and now under the effects of contaminating chemical industries. The former workers designed multiple devices to call the attention about the unhealthy environment, among which was this prototype of a survival kit, a museum far from neutral, promoting agency among its constituents. And now we move to Chile. After President Allende, I talked a few minutes about, was brought down by a military coup that ruled almost during 2 decades, 1973, 1990. Chile was ruled by a dictatorship that imposed an orthodox neoliberal market economy which still shows its effects. While the gross product indices were high, the lower classes wait hopelessly for the announced dripping of the rich fortunes into public education, health, and the empty dishes of the most needed. Last year, the demonstrations paralyzed the country, and among the most outstanding examples of solidarity, there was a museum that stood up to its name, the Museum of Solidarity, Salvador Allende, created with the donations of artworks from artists from all over the world in honor of the deposed socialist leader. It now makes honor not only to him, but to his brand name and prioritize the communities that ask for social justice. As you see on the right, there also, the monument was taken over by the demonstrations. And within the museum, as you see on the left, on the patio, on the courtyard of the museum, there were meetings to discuss the need to do a plebiscite to change the constitution of the country. I mean, a museum that by no means could be thought as neutral, but rather as a museum that promotes agents among its constituents. In Colombia, after 50 years of cruel civil war, forced migrations, and narco regimes, the Colombian troops produced some amazing museums, as this House of Memory, next to the shantytown built on the side of the hills expressed in this picture, and also expressing the stories of forced migrations and violence. And it does it through metaphor, which is the sort of language that distinguishes that museum, that House of Memories. The neighbors made those dishes you now see and drew their stories of how their life was before migrating, before a forced migration, and how it broke in small pieces their life, but those pieces still holding feelings in which they see themselves represented. So it is a collection of feelings. I mean, what I like to see is how the metaphor works to do a radical change of what a collection is. It's a collection of feelings of their people, of their community. And finally, this example of Mexico, a fantastic museum of textile museum in Oaxaca. In a previous epoch, the textile museum of a location with a rich weaving tradition, such as the state of Oaxaca, would have been a handsome showcase, a tourist attraction, and a successful museum gift shop. A profile many museums stage as a financial strategy, focusing towards well-educated largely white, high-spending, middle-class tourists more interested in watching exceptions than normal social occurrences. What we see as a fantastic change is how the museum staff opted to work together with the weaving communities, traveling regularly throughout the state, providing them with the necessary genuine supplies, threads, tints, helping them to teach their ancestral knowledge to the new generations. So, these quick 4 examples show the possibility of change, which of course needs to be worked over and need consensus, and that's one of the reasons why we're here, to try to build consensus with all the museum workers and professionals from all over the world. So I now give his time to the stand or to the image or the computer to Walter Mignolo. Walter?
Yep. I was asked to mute myself, but I lost my screen. I didn't know that. So
There you are.
You are hearing me, right?
Yes, we are seeing you. We are watching you.
Okay. So I'm sorry that I have a problem with it. So thank you very much, Americo, and thank you very much for the people in London and the Association of Museum to invite us. I will talk about, I won't show images, I will show concept in a while. But my talk is to give you a sense of what a change of era may mean. That is the point I wanted to make. This is a decolonial point. Now, decoloniality and decolonization today is used all over. Everybody and the family is using it, and that is fine. I am not a judge to say who is using well and using not well. I will just tell you how we, and the we here means a school of thought, a Latin American school of thought that started about 30 years ago. And there are people not just in Latin America, but they're in Europe, in Eastern Europe and Western Europe, in United States, and of course in South America. So the concept of a change of era comes from this perspective, not necessarily of decoloniality in general. So we can go to the first slide. So I will kind of explain to you what I mean. So that's the title. We in the planet are experiencing a change of era, not longer an era of change where you can put post to whatever is kind of different. So in this vision, the prefix post lost meaning. It remained meaningful for a Eurocentric perspective of history, but not for a decolonial perspective of history. So the question is this. I will start with Siegfried Schmidt, the German jurist and philosopher, who is one of the few Europeans who realized that the big change. I need the second slide, Americo.
I'm sorry.
That one. So it's one of the few Europeans who understood that the big change, he called it the second nomos of the earth, happened in the 16th century, and 1500 is a kind of date of reference. That is unusual because normally Europeans, North Europeans, I mean, the second modernity enlightenment they don't go too much beyond the 18th century. So the Enlightenment is a point of reference. If you look at Foucault, for example, he never goes beyond 1650. And he never goes beyond the North Atlantic from Greece to France. But what is important in in Sigrid Smith is that he saw something different emerge. I call that the colonial revolution. The colonial revolution started the second nomos of the earth that superseded what he called the first nomos, which is kind of polycentric nomos. But the second nomos is began to kind of organize a world order that is unipolar in terms of politics and economy, and is universal in terms of knowledge and sensibility. For him, this kind of nomos began to crumble after World War One, I'm sorry. Then by 1955, he began to realize that there was what he called a new nomos of the earth. And he gave three possibilities of that new nomos of the earth. Remember, that was the Cold War. One of the outcome could be that one of the contenders, Russia or United States, will be the winner and will rule the world. The second possibility is that will be an arrangement in which England and United States, England who ruled the world for since 1900 more or less, and United States will make a strong coalition that will kind of supersede the Soviet Union. And the third one is something he called, excuse my pronunciation in English and in German, Großraum. And Großraum is that he saw that maybe that the third possibility will be kind of regional bloc. This is more or less what we are seeing now, except that Schmidt was still looking at history, unilinear history. That will be a new nomos of the earth that will succeed the second, but will succeed it in a linear way of understanding. Well, for us, that doesn't work. So our possibility, our perspective is that in the 1500s, independent of Schmidt, and that was the kind of something that was said in the 70s, was put in the 70s, but Wallerstein and Quijano. But then it kind of was a split in the conception because Wallerstein was looking at the world still from the North Atlantic, while Quijano was looking at the world from the South American Andes. And the history of the South American Andes, 500 years of colonialism that, of course, Wallerstein was not seeing, and 60% or so of indigenous population, etc. And then you have also the Caribbean that is in contact, and where you have a kind of a strong African diaspora. So instead of the second nomos of the earth, we call the colonial matrix of power. So the colonial matrix of power is that kind of conform, rule, organize the world politically, economically, and epistemically, and aesthetically from 1500 to 2000. That was the era of westernization of the world. Not only Europe constructed itself, Western civilization built itself, and Western civilization built itself by westernizing the world. So the colonial matrix of power for us is nothing less than the deep structure of Western civilization. To give you a kind of quick metaphor, it will be the colonial matrix of power is like the unconscious of Western civilization. And the task of the group that is called modernity coloniality is to do, on the one hand, research of how it was formed, how it's transformed, how it was maintained, and what were the institutions and the actors that kind of regulate that period of the colonial matrix of power. So universities and museums are a fundamental institution in control, knowledge, and sensibility. University and museum, I won't talk about other institutions. I will just make a reference to university and museum that are closer to what we are talking about. And this is interesting because university and museum control the coloniality of knowledge and the coloniality of sensing, of sensibility, and that's related to philosophy, aesthetic, etc. No? But what Americo was showing is very interesting because now the museum is being contested by occupying, not the building, occupying the institution that is called museum. And he gave three wonderful examples of that. No? So the question is that for 1500 to 2000, we have the era of changes, everything of newness and innovation and post, etc., etc. By 2000, the colonial metric of power began to run into big troubles. And the big trouble began to, and here are the signs of that we are into a new era that can no longer be accounted in a linear historical trajectory. No, this is still the second one. It's still the second one, Americo, the previous one. So what happened is that by the end of the 20th century, the beginning of 21st century, we began to notice something that today is already, referred to as de-Westernization. And de-Westernization, if you want a quick example, at this point will be China leading the way, Russia and Iran. All these three countries are capitalists. So capitalism today is all over the world. So de-Westernization doesn't mean a rejection of capitalism. It means a denial, a kind of delinking from the orders and the rules of the White House, of the IMF, and all kind of the European Bank and all the kind of Western institutions. De-Westernization proposed also no longer to remain in an unipolar world that the United States is desperately trying to maintain, but a multipolar world. And that is what is close to what Schmidt was seeing as a possibility of a regional bloc. But what Schmidt didn't see is that the conflict, that kind of the conflict that structure the global order today, and the structure that wrote the global order today in the case of de-Westernization is what we call the imperial difference. And the imperial difference means racism is implied in the imperial difference, also, although not too many people talk about that. But the imperial difference, which is not new, that kind of was put into place when the Christian in the 16th century beat the Muslim Turk in the second half of the 16th century. So they recognize the importance of this civilization, but still they are inferior civilizations. Something is wrong. Something is wrong in Russian civilization, something is wrong with Iran civilization, something is wrong with Chinese civilization. De-Westernization now is trying to reconfigure, re-emerge, restructure. And by doing that, what they are doing are not just disputing political and economic knowledge structure, they are also disputing the right to knowledge. So in China, for example, why they will go back to read Plato and Aristotle? No, they go back to Mencius and Confucius or Buddhism, etc. So why Russia should keep on, this is more complex on Russia, but still they have the Orthodox tradition. They are related to Greece, but it's not the same Greece that was connected to Rome and is connected to Europe. So de-Westernization is this kind of complex dispute for the control of the colonial metric of power at every level. So I won't have time, Americo, to show the scheme, but I will finish with the last 2 points. I have 2 minutes left. So the response to de-Westernization, to the realization that these people are no longer following what the West would like them to do, was re-Westernization. And re-Westernization started, just to go quick, with Obama presidency, with the discourse in Egypt, and then the famous sentence started by Hillary Clinton in Honolulu, that the 21st century will be an American Pacific century. So re-Westernization trying today to contain. What we see is United States trying to contain China, contain Russia, contain Iran. So re-Westernization today is a counter-reformation. And we have to pay attention to it because museum, the official museum, are going, and postmodernity are part of this counter-reformation. If you think about Bruno Latour, modernity reset is the most clear example of somebody who don't want to let modernity to get out. And the final point is that de-Westernization and re-Westernization are mainly a state-led project, but that, of course, impinge on the cultural institution. So, and we are seeing, for example, in relation to I mentioned re-Westernization, that Latour could be read as a kind of contribution to re-Westernization, to the counter-reformation. Well, de-Westernization, we have the Sharjah Biennale. There are two Biennale, Biennale 11 and Biennale 14, that are very clear example of de-Westernization. The first was curated by Yuko Asegawa, and the second, but three curators, but one of the curators that is significantly decolonial is Zoe Butt. Now she's director of Art Factory, something like that, in Vietnam, in Saigon. And finally, in the last minutes, decoloniality. So decoloniality is the rise of the political society. The decoloniality cannot be thought and practiced at the level of the state. The state is too much ingrained in the colonial matrix of power, and the best that the state can do is de-Westernize. So decoloniality is all over now, and in the general sense, and you saw also in the example that Americo was giving. In that case, I will read it, not that they say that they are decolonial, but I read them as decolonial because they are appropriating. They are appropriating the institution of museum, saying, listen, why do I have to go into the Louvre, etc., to see this kind of magnificent monument of the colonial matrix of power? We now kind of transform the museum into kind of a decolonial, and we call that the politic of decolonial reconstitution of knowing and sensing and believing. So we can, in the next 30 seconds, let me show the diagram. So this is the kind of a visual image of the colonial matrix of power. I don't have time to to explain it, but just to know that when we talk about the colonial matrix of power, and this is not fixed, of course, this is kind of constant movement in 500 years, and it's all now transformed radically because of the dispute that de-Westernization introduced and the delinking that decoloniality is accomplishing. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Walter. And I think that we have a lot here to discuss, and all opinions and comments are welcome, and we'll try to answer as much as we may after we finish with our panelists. So I will now ask Marilia Bonas to do her part, and I will try. I've been having a hard time in sharing the right screen. Somehow it left. I don't know where it went.
Oh, it's
No, but I'm afraid this is not the.
kind of slide.
Oh, there we are.
Okay, yes.
Okay, there we are. So
Thank you.
Marilia, you're welcome.
Thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you, Americo. Thank you, Walter. I was like taking notes and trying to make my presentation not so skin deep compared, but it's an honor to present a Latin American perspective to you all. And I'll read a little bit to be more clear. And so what do we mean when we say a change of area in the field of museum? And why do we Latin Americans say this with conviction? First, I will point out this conceptual origin of Latin American museology that echoes today in the whole discussion about the definition of museums. So we had in Kyoto a huge discussion about the new definition of museums, and it's really connected to the Roundtable of Santiago that Americo presented in the beginning in 1972. And it's important to stress that in the 60s and 70s, Paraguay, Brazil, Argentina, Bolivia, Peru, Chile, Uruguay, Ecuador, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua, all these countries were they experienced bloody dictatorships, and some of which lasted more than 2 decades. So this declaration, the Santiago Declaration, is a declaration of resistance, brought to museology for the first time the centrality of museums' work with communities and their social role as something non-negotiable. And these premises have marked and marks the actions of Latin American museums since then. Of course, we have coexistence of different institutions, but we have this premise that mark us and mark our actions. And well, today, unfortunately, the world is experiencing issues with which Latin America has lived for a long time, like climate change, migration flow, threat to originary peoples, revisionism, denialism, far-right governments, growth of inequality, politicization of human rights, and now we are all dealing also with the pandemic. So we believe that the answer, we can, the next slide, Americo, thank you. It's just to present a little. So it's some excerpt. So we are dealing with the pandemic in our very, very, very pluriversal, very distinct word and concepts and contexts and cultures. And we believe that the answer to these challenges are community-centered museums and shared authority. And so we can go to the next slide. Thank you, Americo. So I'll bring some examples. So examples of this change of era. I bring some experience of response from Latin American museums in the context of the pandemic, based on their specialties devoted to civic action. So this main idea of community-centered museums and shared authority in big museums, smaller museums, not just eco-museums or territory museums, but in general, it's something that we believe that this is the change of era. So this is an example of a project, Revival Memories of the Football Museum in São Paulo, Brazil, inspired by the Scottish Football Museum project. And the Football Museum nowadays provides virtual assistance to patients with dementia isolated due to the coronavirus pandemic. So this is one example. We can go to the other. Thank you, Americo. The other example is the word in now. It's a project of the Portuguese Language Museum, also in São Paulo, Brazil, the 2 museums where I work, that offers writing tools for mourning and shares text from the public on its platform. The project also brings support materials for mourners and their family and shares campaigns to support needy communities in the context of coronavirus pandemic. So in Brazil, we have such a cultural difficulty to talk about death and to mourn. So this is a project developed by the museum to help people to express their feelings in the context of the pandemic. So it's like a specialty of the museum, and we are devoting this specialty to a civic action for now. The next example is just like one example that Americo presented in the beginning, the Textile Museum of Oaxaca, that are developing a lot of projects, also virtual projects to text, how can you see, how can you develop different textiles in your own house with your own community virtually, and like a support, how can you support your community even in this context of the museums when they're closed. And also a new organization, so a new Argentine museum network, the network of museum professionals that are debating the role of the Argentine museums in the institutional crisis caused by the pandemic, and also thinking about community engagement in this context. And the next example, thank you, Americo. And Museum of Memory and Human Rights and Human Rights in Santiago, Chile, the coordinator of food collection campaign and developed projects related to the violation of human rights during the pandemic period, specifically immigrant communities. So they're working in campaigns, but they are also investigating, researching, developing, collecting, but for the community, with the community. And the Immigration Museum in São Paulo, Brazil, also coordinated a campaign to collect clothes, food, and medicines for refugees and develop remotely educational projects with these communities. And the next, thank you. And House of Memory Museum in Medellin, that Americo was presented also. They coordinated the mapping of vulnerable populations in their own territory. And with the support of the city of Medellin, they distributed, and they're still distributing, food and donations, and also developed oral history projects and exhibition to these communities. So they're making with the community a lot of projects, but also helping in this emergency of the pandemic. And People's House in São Paulo, in Brazil also, with the support of more 3 museums, mapped vulnerable communities in their surroundings, known as Crackland. So it's a huge area in downtown São Paulo that has more than 3,000 addicts, crack addicts. And in the middle of pandemic, this group of institutions, cultural institutions, begin to map and to listen the needs of these different groups inside Crackland, in the buildings nearby, and they raised funds for different needs brought by these communities, and they registered and documented all the process also for legacy, and to understand how they can be more effective to this community where they are, all these institutions. So the next thing, I think is just in the beginning, I'm going to close, but such examples show us that the social role of museums does not develop just from a theoretical discussion, but from everyday and structuring practice. Museums integrate society and their communities. They are not external observers. As museum workers, we have to actively promote the transformation of internal structures to make them diverse, representative, horizontal, more generous, more effective, more with rapid response, and well, and build alliance and act without fear on the scale of what is possible, but without going back, is the path of this change of era. And we Latin Americans, we really believe in this, and we are really glad to share our view with you and to inspire you to join us in this change of area and this change of this central role of museums, even if we are dealing with difficult times. So I think thank you very much. It's a short presentation. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Marilia. And I have now, and I can now see the some questions here. It says from Beatriz Pizarro Aparicio, it says, how do you think Western country institutions, in particular in the UK, could take a leaf out of Latin America's book to be more embracing and open of their communities and, in a way, be more dissident, revolutionary, and braver? Well, that's a question that we Latin Americans have a hard time in answering, Beatriz. But it's good that you put it on the table. Rob Sharp from Southends Museum says, fantastic insights. Do you have any tips, advice as to how state civic funded museums can push towards decoloniality given the limitations you identified at state level? Marilia, do you think how could, or give some tip of how state museums could react? Because actually, as Walter said, it's more a civic movement than state. But can we? Well, it's difficult. I find it. I was director of the National Museum of Fine Arts in Argentina, and I know how they are politically biased in a way that it's very hard to say what one really thinks a museum should be when you are at a museum which is 100% funded by the state, and they have their own opinions. But still, I find at least the Museum Association in Britain is putting together some very, very creative communities that tend to show a dissenting idea of what museums are, and they don't really obey the main policies. I don't know, Walter, if you have an opinion about that.
Yeah, I have an opinion in this sense. Well, I have an opinion, especially in the same kind of question can be asked to the university, private or state university. But I have been working with curators and museum directors and artists for a long time, for about 10 years. So I have an opinion there too. And my opinion briefly is this, that there is some work you can do and should do in the museum and the university. So, and a lot of people we are working with, we cannot convince the state to kind of go the way we want, because the state have their own problem. And at this point, the states are either in the de-Westernizing side or in the re-Westernizing side. So Brazil was in the de-Westernizing side until Dilma was knocked down. And now Brazil is in the re-Westernizing side. In Argentina have been the opposite. Macri was totally re-Westernizing. Now Fernandez is going more into the de-Western. But the state have limitation. And we saw it in Bolivia, etc. The university have limitation. But we can do decolonial work within the university and within the museum. And I think the Marilia and Americo give a lot of examples of that. On the other hand, I work more in the kind of theory, because the macro narrative, the concept of Western civilization are controlling us, and that needs work to be done conceptually. So, and in that area, my opinion is that while the museum and university can be occupied as not as a building, but as an institution and do our work, we have to question the basic institution of the museum and the university. Education do not need university. Education has been taken by corporate mentality at the university, and the museum too. So I think that there is another work to be done, is to question the assumption and the presupposition that brought the museum into Western civilization and spread all over the world. That is a work that would take a few generations, but is in the way of being addressed.
Thank
I
you,
would like
Walter.
to share.
Here, I'm sorry, Marilia.
No, just to share a little bit from my experience. I work for state museums for almost 20 years and public museum with public funding, and also museums that are really against what's happening in the government, even if they're state museums. I worked in the Memorial of Resistance, that was a site of memory connected to the dictatorship period during a government that that defends the military. So I think that we have some strategies. I think the first strategy sometimes is to look inside. You have all the diversity you need inside your own internal staff. So if you think about the cleaning staff, the security guards, not only the technical staff, you can have like a huge different cultures, different people, different backgrounds, and you can start developing listening and trying to understand how can you make this your own institution like more generous to your own staff. I think it's one of the things, more accessible, more general. And the other thing, as a Brazilian, I use it a lot. I think is the concept of opacity. You can be transparent, you can communicate everything, but you can also communicate in parts. So you have a strong project to understand you want to change something, and you step by step, you present different aims, different challenges for each part, and this transformation, you keep it moving. So I think it's sometimes we're thinking about decolonizing in also in a very hierarchical perspective, but I think it's the opposite. So listening to the diversity that you already had in your own team and try to develop strategic projects with your own diverse staff could be a first step, even for state museums.
Here, Mark from Ipswich asks, is de-Westernization a completely positive thing? In regards to the examples you give of Russia, China, and Iran, and the axis of power being angled towards them. See, that's a question for Walter.
Can you read again the beginning?
Is de-Westernization a completely positive thing? In regards to the examples you give of Russia, China, and Iran, and the axis of power being angled towards them.
Toward what?
Towards them.
Oh, no, I am not deciding who is good and who is positive and who is negative. I am just saying, we like it or not, that is what happened. And I am saying also that happened because of Western civilization. So for example, another example, in Europe now, a lot of people, I imagine that you too, are really worried about the kind of resurgence of the extreme right. Well, who created the extreme right? The neoliberal globalists. So what are you complaining about? So the question is not either or, the question is neither A nor B. So the decolonial kind of detach the link from this kind of dichotomous way of thinking of kind of Western modernity. So that is what I was thinking to say. I mean, what I see is that neither Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, they won't like to be told what to do. And that's it. I mean, why? What is the right? I mean, let me say this. I think Western modernity and Western civilization since the 1500 make a great contribution to the overall human different civilization. And that is great, and we recognize that. What we don't recognize is the aberration. And the aberration is the pretense, the arrogance of the West that this is the way to live and everybody has to do that. So de-Westernization and decoloniality are kind of reducing that arrogance to their own size. The Western have the right to exist, but have no right whatsoever in politics, in economy, in culture, in knowledge, in museum, in university, to tell the other people what is good or what is bad. So that is the decolonial position. As Quijano was said to say, and this is, I think, is a Guarani saying, neither A nor B, but exactly the opposite.
Well, yeah. I think that that's the type of a conversation we need to have, which is, especially when we talk about museums and taxonomies. You know, taxonomies are the way in which our countries were colonized, because they had to describe what they saw. When the colonizers, the expeditioners, explorers had to describe what they saw. Why? Because they wanted to take the profit out of it and take it home to the to Europe. So those taxonomies express ideology, and we have accepted taxonomies not only in science but also in the arts, and what is modern, what is not, what is impressionist, what is not. I mean, all this type of qualifications that were imposed into us, so we say what is good and what is bad according to someone else's values, and not the values that we have that come from our own experience. And it is in the interstices of those taxonomies, it is in those places which they are not A, neither B, where there could be a value that represents our feelings. And that is what I was trying to express with the metaphors shown at the Colombian Museum of Memory, with those broken dishes. I mean, it is in that rupture, in that no place, which is not a fragment nor the other, but something in between, where we may express what is happening to us. So yes, it's good to say that neither A nor B, but just the opposite. I think that's a good answer. I don't know if we have another question. Laura von Brockenhoven. Do you think, that's a nice name, Laura van Brockenhoven. Do you think pluriversality might be an answer to current and past epistemicide? And would museums be able to play a constructive role in that? Did you get that, Walter? Do you think pluriversality might be an answer to current and past epistemicide or epistemicide? And would museums be able to play a constructive role in that?
I don't talk about epistemicide. That is Boaventura de Sousa Santos. That is his problem. We talk about that the constitution of the colonial matrix of power is in the same movement that constitute destitute. So unipolarity and universality, the abstract universal of knowledge, that kind of destitute other, all other coexisting knowledge. Now, the question of the decolonial and the Western in this area is the restitution, but the restitution has to come through the nociological and aesthetic reconstitution. Okay? They have to reconstitute their knowing and sensing, but they cannot do it using epistemological and aesthetic categories. So they have to kind of articulate in the other ways, or nociology, nociology and aesthesis are two kind of category, the colonial category. So the question is that one, the question you ask, One way to answer is the Sharjah Biennale or the Museum of Islamic Art in Doha. That is what they are doing. So the question, how do you do that in London or in Paris or in Germany? So they have a lot of money in Doha, as you know, and the Emirates. So they are not using that money to produce that money, but they are using that money, appropriating the museum, buying Western art to kind of reconstitute a memory and a way of practice of living that the West told them you have to despise. Now, the question how you do that. So with Charles Esch from the Eindhoven von Abbey Museum, we are in a conversation of thinking about the modern. So the modern will be, because he's Scottish, he is working in Holland, he is in the heart of Europe. So the modern, and that's his concept, the modern will be a way that he and other people are thinking in the direction that the question has kind of underscored.
Thanks, Walter. Well, I think we are just on time to close up. I don't know if Marilia, you want to add anything to this? Well, if not, Walter, Marilia, Simon, we're very grateful to have had this opportunity to do this dialogue with you, and I hope we do it more often.
Thanks so much, Americo. It was a really wonderful discussion. It was really rich and varied, some beautiful examples of some fantastic work and some great ideas. So we're really privileged to have you share this, and we should do it more often. You're exactly right. Thanks so much.